So I have been sitting on something for a little while, and I've been sitting on it because I wanted to wait until I could speak about it from lived experience. I didn't want to do an episode on this just as a clinician, not as someone who suspected something about herself, but as someone who truly, deeply knew and had something to support it. So here it is. I turned 33 on Saturday, and I have just been diagnosed with ADHD. So I know some of you are going to be like, Nick, you literally work in mental health. How did you not know this? And honestly, I did know. I've always recognized myself in the ADHD criteria for years. I understand the diagnostic bits and bobs. I work in this space. I work with many women with ADHD, but the reality is here in New Zealand as an adult, getting a proper assessment means you have to privately fund it. And just for a long time, I've not been able to do that for myself. And anyway, right? I was functioning. I was achieving things. I told myself I was doing okay. And I mostly was. But the older I've gotten, the harder certain things have become. Like working for myself, doing stuff like this, the biggest, greatest gift for my brain. Like, I love this structure that I get to create, the variety, the way I get to run my days. I get to be autonomous, creative. It's freaking awesome. I have never been able to really fall in love with a job anywhere else. After 6 months, when I mastered the tasks, I would just get restless, bored. I just don't want to be there anymore. So that's why I started my own business. That's why I do Binge and it's been awesome for that reason. And of course, now I kind of understand one of the reasons why. But I've also been working like 12 or 14-hour days because no matter how much I get done, nothing ever feels like enough. And I get overstimulated by certain sounds or light and honestly, just silly things like my husband breathing. And I see memes about that and I have a little laugh. And then I'm like, okay, but is this funny? It's not just a meme. And it's not those things. It's so many things that just keep stacking up. And if you're a girl like me, this is probably resonating, right? Last year, exactly a year ago, actually, I won a really huge international business competition. It was a huge life-changing moment. And part of that includes some prize money. And so I decided to invest that into more personal development, more self-care, and that included getting an assessment. And getting that wasn't because I needed to be told, but I just really wanted a non-biased professional opinion, someone I could really trust. I didn't want to self-diagnose and just throw that word around. I mean, especially because here on this podcast and our community I've created for us, it's always been grounded in lived experience and telling real stories, things I know to be true, not things I'm assuming. So I didn't want to go ahead and make an episode about ADHD until I was really sure. And I'll be honest, it's been complicated since figuring this out. I mean, I've been exploring medication, but I have a heart condition. So the cardiology team has been a real battle. And the assessment itself, the diagnosis, all that came with it, right? I guess I wasn't prepared for what would come up for me. I mean, I expected the label made sense, but I didn't expect the identity shift and the grief, because I felt a lot of grief. Because what happens is you look back at your entire life through this totally different lens. The little girl who was always too loud, too bossy, too sensitive, or the teenager who was a high achiever and such a good girl, and the woman who just absolutely worked herself into the ground and still never felt like enough, or couldn't stop eating and believed that for years because she would use food, that was a character flaw. And all of it really made sense. And so that was a relief. But also, like, I've just been mourning, like, why did no one pick this up? Why didn't I get help sooner? Could things have been different? And so I'm still processing that for sure. And I'm feeling a little bit pissed off about some of it. I've worked really freaking hard my whole life, and I'm sure you have too, right? We are told that we need more discipline, more willpower, work harder, push through. And that was actually never the truth. And I now know that I deserve better than that. And so many of us neurospicy gals, because I'm now starting to call myself, we deserve that. We all deserve that. So I guess where I've landed is I'm proud of myself for getting here. I'm proud of myself for investing in that knowledge, even when it's caused a lot of discomfort. This is what real personal development looks like. It's not all like fluffy, feel good stuff. And so I'm learning, I'm going deeper. This is the next level of what I'm learning about me. And I'll say this, if you ever work with a coach or a therapist or anyone in this kind of space who isn't doing their own ongoing inner work, then I think that's a real big red flag, because we all have areas to grow. This is just my next thing that I'm learning about, embodying, integrating. And I wanted to share it with you because that's why this podcast exists, to have real talk. And because, well, binge eating occurs and even more higher rates in people with ADHD. I want to say this too, that you don't need to have a diagnosis for this episode to be useful for you. Whether you have the label or whether you suspect you might, or whether you might just recognize some of these patterns in yourself, there's going to be so much in our chat today that is going to be relevant and helpful regardless of paperwork and labels, right? The overlaps between neurodivergent traits and binge eating are super real. And it doesn't matter if you have a diagnosis to be able to take the strategies that work, because if they work for someone who's neurodiverse, they'll work for someone who's neurotypical too. Okay, so let's get into it. I've decided to do an episode just on like ADHD and binge eating 101. And I'm going to cover the research, the brain science, some real life examples, and I'm going to give you one practical tool to take away today. And I want you to know too that this is just going to be the first episode on this topic. It's not going to be a one and done. I'm going to keep coming back to this and touching on it. But I thought, let's just lay some groundwork. Let's start connecting the dots now. Let's get started. All right. So I thought, let's start with just covering the groundwork. Let's start with the research, because the stats are actually really interesting. I found them super interesting. And it matters that you hear them too, because I feel like so many of us have been led to believe that our eating struggles were a personal failure, when actually they're just reflecting something neurological. And of course, this can just be one piece of the puzzle. Everything I've talked about in other episodes about, physical restriction, mental, nervous system dysregulation, that's still why we binge. But people with ADHD are 4 times more likely to have binge eating disorder. 4 times. Blew my mind, that stat. I mean, that means it's not just a coincidence, right? It is a pattern. And among those with binge eating disorder, ADHD prevalence ranges from 10 to 36%. So compared to just 3 to 7% in the general adult population. So I'm not talking about a marginal overlap here. We're talking about something meaningful and a structural connection between how an ADHD brain works and why binge eating develops. And of course, but we're not told this, are we? I was never told this. Didn't even know I had ADHD until a month ago. I mean, most of us have sat in appointments or therapy sessions or seen a dietitian or a doctor, and no one ever once said, are you neurodiverse? Do you think maybe you have ADHD? Many people, especially girls and women, are just never screened for ADHD, are we? That's why I'm 33 and I'm here now. Instead, we're diagnosed with anxiety or depression, definitely got ticks for both of those. And when the underlying neurology is never addressed, or we're just not looking at the whole picture, then we're treating surface level symptoms or things that never truly get to all the things at the root of the eating. And that's been my experience, apparently. And I know it's the experience of many women in my community as well. Many women in the breakup are neurodiverse. And it's just nice to finally be able to say that's my case too. All right. So why does this connection exist? What is actually happening in our brains? I want to break this down really simply. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a therapist. I'm an eating disorder therapist, trauma therapist. So I'm not going to go right down into the bones of it, but I do think that it's helpful because once you understand it, so much of your history is going to start making sense. I've had so many light bulb moments lately. The thing is, I think the core of ADHD is not actually about attention, despite the name, right? It's about dopamine. And I recently did an episode on dopamine, episode 68. I'll put it in the show notes. Make sure you listen to that because it goes deep into dopamine. The thing is, people with ADHD actually have lower baseline levels of dopamine. So what's dopamine? It's the chemical that's driving motivation, reward, satisfaction. And when that dopamine runs low, the brain is seeking out ways to boost it quickly. So dopamine tells us, hey, this is worth doing. Let's keep going. Is what makes you feel engaged and motivated and satisfied. And in an ADHD brain, that system is chronically underactive already. So your brain's always looking for that hit and it needs something to bring it back online. And what do we learn? Food. Particularly that high sugar, high fat, really palatable food, that spikes dopamine. And of course, then that just reinforces that behavior for an ADHD brain. And think as well, food is predictable. That means it's a easy, higher yield dopamine source. And ADHD is very often accompanied by emotional dysregulation. So our brain says, okay, well, I'm not just looking for food to stimulate me, have a sense of feeling good, but I also need to soothe. And so we know food does that. And when you've been reaching for food because of that dysregulation, so overwhelm, boredom, it's not weakness or self-sabotaging if you went for the dopamine or you went for the food, right? You know that food equals dopamine. And now let's talk about executive function. So ADHD affects the prefrontal cortex. So that front part of your brain, that part is responsible for impulse control, planning, decision-making. And these are the exact skills that are required to eat in a consistent, regulated way. Things like, making sure there's always food in your cupboard, planning ahead, following through on intentions, pausing before acting on an impulse, recognizing when you're full, stopping when you're, totally full. I mean, all of that lives in the part of the brain that ADHD directly impacts. So again, this is not a willpower thing. It's a neurological thing and it always has been. Now, how does ADHD drive binge eating or struggles with food? So we're going to talk about 6 specific ADHD traits and I'm going to show you exactly how they show up in your relationship with food. Some of these will resonate. Maybe all of them will resonate. See which of them resonate for you. So the first one that's super common is forgetting to eat. And then what happens is we binge later. So we have a hyperfocus. That means that we can be distracted by lots of things and forget to eat for extended periods. So we're locked into work, a project, a task. And then for some people, suddenly it's 3 o'clock and they haven't eaten since 7. So blood sugar's on the floor, dopamine has tanked, and now you're not just hungry, you're totally ravenous, and your binge isn't emotional, it's biological, isn't it? Your brain has gone into that starvation mode. And when someone with ADHD restricts their food, whether it's on purpose through something like a diet or because they've lost track of time, then dopamine, like I said, it's on the floor. So by the time you're eating, your brain isn't just hungry for food. It also wants that reward, that pleasure that we do get from the dopamine. So if you say things like, oh gosh, I barely ate all day and then I couldn't stop at dinner, that's not your fault. That could be an ADHD brain playing catch up. So the second thing is emotional dysregulation. So feelings that feel like a freight train. They feel big, intense feelings. These are more difficult to manage for people with ADHD, and that can lead to using food to cope with stress, sadness, overwhelm. I've talked about this many times on the body so far. But what's important to understand about ADHD emotional dysregulation is that it's not that we feel more emotions necessarily, is that we have less of a buffer between feeling something and then being like totally consumed by it. Like there's not as much space for pause. You go from zero to overwhelm very quickly. And of course, again, if we come back, what gives us that fast, available, immediate dopamine hit that's going to soothe us? Food. Real life example, right? You have a hard chat with your partner, and someone with a neurotypical brain might feel upset, sit with it, maybe call a friend, and an ADHD brain can go from, well, that was upsetting to like head in the pantry, in 30 seconds without actually consciously deciding to go there. Of course, that can happen for anyone as well, but it's very common in neurodiverse people. Okay, 3 is impulsivity. So acting before the pause arrives. Key trait, again, is that impulse control difficulty. So in the context of food, this looks like walking past the kitchen and just eating something because you were there, not because you were hungry, not because you planned it, but because you just walked in. There's a habit loop of eating every time you're in the kitchen, the impulse fired, and you never had that pause or moment to consider. Think about the 10 p.m. chocolate too. The second serving you didn't mean to have, the spontaneous drive-through. That's not a lack of self-control. It's just that neurological mechanism that's creating a gap between the impulse to act on the thing, so the urge to eat, and the action. Research really suggests too that impulse control is one of the primary deficits in ADHD. And I think most of us can say, yeah, I'm living that, I'm experiencing that. And I mean, that's why there's such an overlap between ADHD and binge eaters. I mean, it's common in both cohorts of people. All right. Number 4 is boredom eating. I mean, the brain's looking for stimulation, isn't it? And this one is pretty underrated. And I think it was one of the things that I learned later in my recovery journey is that I was using food to stimulate when I was bored. Again, dopamine levels on the floor. And the ADHD brain finds genuine, uncomfortable distress in having a low stimulation environment. So if you find that you're nibbling when you're working, that could be why. That's what I found happened for me. And when I look back on my history, I was like, you know what? My binge eating was at its worst when I was at uni. And I really found it hard to hone in or concentrate on my assignments unless I had a bowl of chippies with me. It was like this thing of like I'd sit down and have the chippies and then I'd suddenly be able to hone in and focus and get stuff done. And have you noticed that the foods are always like crunchy, sweet, textured, like quite high intensity flavored stuff? That's because it offers a bit more stimulation. So that is an interesting thing too. Okay, number 5 that an ADHD brain does is we have poor I can't say this word, interoception, i.e. not being able to read your own body. I don't think this one's talked about enough, but essentially it means you can't reliably tune into your body's cues, especially the hunger ones and the fullness ones. So your ability to sense what's happening. And not just hunger or fullness, it's even like, do I need to go to the toilet? Am I thirsty? Tension. Research shows that like this is not just for ADHD, but many neurodivergent people. And it's very common. So you might not genuinely feel hungry until you suddenly notice you're starving. Or you might not feel full until you're like way past full. The signals maybe are quieter, harder to read, or a bit delayed. And I think that's also why intuitive eating feels like sometimes it doesn't work or it's really hard to catch on to. A lot of intuitive eating practices is all about listening and honoring your hunger and fullness cues. But if you can't hear those, then what do you do? It's not that you're not trying to hear those cues. Maybe the signals are just harder to actually hear. And that's when you do the really structured mechanical eating instead. Okay, last one, 6. We're going to talk about the shame spiral and how neurospicy brains keep that cycle alive. So we know that the binge eating cycle starts with some dysregulation. It moves into a binge. That spikes your dopamine to feel good for like 5 seconds. And then you crash into the guilt and the shame, which of course, when we're feeling guilty and ashamed, well, then we binge to soothe. And the part that's really heartbreaking is that I think a lot of traditional eating advice assumes a neurotypical brain, right? Just eat regularly, just plan your meals, just listen to your body. And as I was saying before, that advice can feel really hard to follow. Then when it doesn't work, you feel ashamed of yourself. And shame is just fuel to the fire, right? Makes things worse. So maybe you've been receiving advice that was not actually built for your brain. And so that advice was failing you over and over, but you blamed yourself for years or decades, but you don't need to do that anymore. If you're hearing yourself and some of the things I'm talking about today, this could be the reason. Quick pause here, besties, because I want to share with you a free resource that might really, really help you. So if you're struggling with overeating, binges, emotional eating, or maybe food just feels like it has a little bit too much power over you, then I have created a free guide. It's called the Emotional Eater's Fix. So inside this guide, I'm breaking down some of the real reasons why this pattern has been happening. And I'm going to walk you through a few simple tools that you can start using straight away to shift your relationship with food and your body. It's totally free. You can just grab it through the link in the show notes. All right, let's jump back into the episode. So I think another good thing to talk about is why so many women get diagnosed late and why that matters. I'm speaking specifically right now to the late diagnosed woman, or the woman who's not even diagnosed, but she suspects it. I'm one of you. You heard my story at the start of this episode. I'm 33. I just found this out. It doesn't get picked up in us as kids because girls and women present very differently to the hyperactive little boy. He's a diagnostic template. But we got very good at masking and internalizing and developing coping strategies that actually looks like we're coping, even then we know that maybe we're not actually coping too well. And we get called scattered, oversensitive, smart, but not applying yourself. You end up having anxiety or depression. And we get told that we just need more discipline or consistency or effort. And our relationship with food can become chaotic or emotional or very all or nothing, and that just gets filed under another thing that you need to work on. But no one has ever asked you why. It was just another symptom. I mean, I know that I was told my whole life that I was too much and also not enough simultaneously. She's too large, she's too sensitive, she's too intense. And yet somehow nothing I ever did was enough either or never quite hit the mark. That's why I was saying before is I'm looking back at life thus far and I'm proud of who I am and where I've been and the things I've achieved. But I also think what could have happened if I had known that, if I just had understood myself a little more and created a life that held that and looked after that. So maybe you feel the same way. I'm really proud of myself. I am really grateful to have the resources and really grateful that I managed to recover from struggling with food and my body, despite not having this kind of piece of the puzzle about myself. And I think when you do have that piece of the puzzle, when you get that diagnosis or at least just kind of resonate with it and start to act in accordance with it, you will see a reduction in binge eating urges and you will feel a greater stability with food. Getting a diagnosis doesn't solve everything, but it does mean that you get to start to change the narrative about yourself. You're not like, something's wrong with me. It's like, okay, so my brain works different. And now I know that. And now I get to try some things that actually are in alignment with that. And I can drop all of the other stuff. So I promised you I would give you one practical tool on today's episode, something that's actually going to be useful, something that doesn't assume that you're neurotypical, because maybe you're not. Maybe you are. Doesn't matter. So this tool is called the dopamine check-in, and it has been designed specifically for an ADHD brain, and it works by creating something that your brain struggles to generate on its own. And it's what we were talking about before. It's that little pause. So when you find yourself moving toward food, especially when, it feels like that urge, it's urgent, it's unplanned, you're not actually sure if you're hungry, you can stop for 60 seconds and you can ask yourself these questions. There's 3. So the first one is, what is my body actually doing right now? Not asking, am I hungry? Because we've already established that sometimes that signal can be quite hard to read. So instead, asking, am I tired? Am I tense? Am I restless, overwhelmed? Maybe I'm bored. And just naming that physical state gets you out of the autopilot kind of mode and in the pantry, and at least into a state of awareness. Number 2 is, what does my brain actually want? Is it seeking stimulation? Is it seeking comfort? Maybe you're looking for a break or a reward, something to do with your hands, some fuel. Maybe you actually do need to eat. But food in that case will be the right answer, hey? And maybe it's not. But either way, asking this question means that you get to make a conscious choice rather than just an automatic one. Third question I want you to ask yourself is there anything else that I could possibly need in this moment? So could a 5-minute walk meet this feeling of restlessness that I've got? Should I dance around to some music? Should I text a friend because I'm actually feeling lonely? Could a few deep breaths meet this moment of overwhelm? And maybe you still eat. Maybe you needed to, or maybe you just choose to. And that's actually fine because you still had the pause. You still learn to create that gap between the impulse and like just going hard, going in for it. And that gap is where choice lives. And choice is just going to be the foundation of everything that you need to be able to start doing this food freedom work. So the tool's simple, right? It's just asking yourself a few questions. It's not a cure, but it is something that you can use today. And it works with your brain rather than against it. So that was a lot. It was a lot for me. And I hope the episode landed though. I hope it was helpful. I hope there was something in here that made you feel less like you've been failing and maybe just more that you've been misunderstood or alone in this journey. If you've spent years just being told that your relationship with food comes down to effort or discipline or motivation, and actually turns out, well, you do have an ADHD brain, then how's that ever been a fair fight for you? You were trying to use a map that was just, drawn for a different territory. I also want to say that getting a diagnosis or recognizing these patterns in yourself does not make the food freedom journey harder. It actually, in my experience, in my opinion, I think it makes it a lot clearer and easier because you get to stop fighting yourself. Once you really process emotions, like I said, I've had frustration, I've had anger, I've had grief. And once you work through that, you start to embody it, you accept this new version of you. How powerful is that? Because it means that you're able to keep doing this work more in alignment with yourself than ever. And the cool thing is, when I think about the community I've built, it works. It works for people who have neurodivergent. And obviously, it makes sense why. It's because I actually created it from my own recovery journey. I created it from what I knew worked for me. And the thing is, it won't only work for neurospicy people. It will work for all of us because what works for us will work for a neurotypical brain. But I wanted to highlight that though, because I want you to know there is a space for you. There are tools that will work for you. There is a community for you. It is safe here and you are so welcome. So hopefully you've had a few light bulb moments. Hopefully this has been really helpful. And, DM me, let me know. Send me an email. I mean, that's exactly what I'm here for. I love hearing from you girls. And if you want to connect, if you want to work together, I have a little bit of space open at the moment. So just, reach out on my socials or email. You know where to find me. All the details are in my show notes. Take care until next week. I've got a few more pretty cool episodes lined up. So make sure that you're tuning in every week. I'll always be here. And I'll catch you again soon. Ciao. All right, besties, that's a wrap for today. If you want to go deeper, check out the links in my show notes. You're going to find free resources, ways we can work together, and more details on my signature program, The Breakup. This is your roadmap to help you to break free from binge and emotional eating for good. If this episode has helped you, please hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're feeling extra kind, leaving a quick review really helps this podcast to reach more women who need it. Take care of your beautiful self, bestie, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.